Hello everybody, welcome to the presentation for Forage for Bees. I'm one of the lucky ones who gets to do some of the fun things here at this presentation. I know a lot of you guys are going to be out there taking a look at all the nasties and all the bad things that are going on with the bees. So again, this is going to be a fortunate one for both of us that we can go through the fun things with the flowers and the trees. My name is Mary Simonelli, and I've been a member of the Medina County Bee Club for about 10 years. And I've been a master gardener for probably 21 years. I started out in Georgia. And I've been actually concentrating in bees, native bees, as well as honeybees for probably the last 12 years in doing pollination programs with Denise Ellsworth through the Ohio State University pollinator program. So I have always enjoyed doing this, and it's fun to go out there and watch them. And I hope that you enjoy going out there and watching the bees and watching the pollen and the nectar that they're bringing in, and just have a lot of fun with them. So with that, I'll go ahead and start. One thing I wanted to mention is there will be a couple of handouts that you will have access to, so you don't necessarily have to remember about writing any of this down or doing any of that, because a lot of this information will be available to you later on. So with that, let's get started. So first thing is, what does a bee actually want out there? We know bees are vegetarians, so they're not like our nasty old wasps or yellow jackets, and they're looking for four things. They want pollen, which is their primary protein source. It's used for feeding brood. It contains the fats and the vitamins and the nutrients that they need. And the pollen are very different with the different plants. So it's very, very important that you have a wide variety of plants that are available to them, because it's like us. We can live on Twinkies, but it's really very good for us to have a lot of good nutrition. The second thing that bees need is nectar. Now, nectar is used for making wax. Of course, it's going to be used for honey. They use it for their carbohydrate source, and they use it for their energy for flying. Now, I might mention here that bees have a tongue, honeybees that is, have a tongue that's about 1/4 of an inch long. So when you look at her trying to get into that little flower, I think she's probably got some delusions, because I don't think she's going to have much success. But they're pretty nosy, so they're going to try to do everything they can. The carbohydrate nectar source also contains the minerals calcium, sodium, potassium, and magnesium. The next thing that bees need is water. Now, they need water for cooling the hive, and they also use it for diluting the honey in order to feed their brood. Now, it's good if you can provide a water source for them, because if you don't, they're going to be out there hunting for water wherever they can get it. Somebody else's swimming pool, like a neon sign saying, hey, there's water here. It's got all kinds of chemicals in it, especially chlorine, which is going to attract the honeybees. So you do not want your honeybee girls going out there to your neighbor's swimming pools, or in some little cow pasture collecting some really nasty water. The fourth thing that bees need is they're out there collecting rosin so that they can make propolis. Now, propolis is something that they use to seal the little cracks in the hive. They also use it to carry around the hive as kind of an antimicrobial, so that they keep the rest of the hive very sanitary. And as you know, they also use it to stick your boxes together, so that it's almost like sticky glue that your boxes will crack before the propolis will break. So the goal that we have for our bees is to have as many bees as we possibly can, and at the same time make sure that they don't run out of room, because they need room for storing pollen, for storing the honey for us, storing honey for them. They have to dry the nectar, so they need room for that. They have to need room for the queen to lay her eggs. And also, as the bees are getting more voluminous in the colony, they have to make sure that they've got plenty of room for the bees themselves. So as these bees are being built up, it's very, very, very important that you know exactly what is going on inside that hive. Because if you don't, you're going to have a problem that they're going to take off on you. You're going to lose your good queen that you probably just paid a lot of money for. You're going to lose half of your honey stores. And it's going to take you at least 3 weeks to go ahead and get another new queen for you to start all over again. So let's take a journey through the year here with the plants. And again, these are going to be pretty much in sequence. Now, I have set this up that the first section is basically things that are going to be wild. It's important for you to go out and look around and see what's going on within 2 or 3 miles of where your apiary is, because that way you're going to know what's actually out there and how you can supplement if the trees or the plants are not out there. The phenology calendar only goes into trees and shrubs. It does not handle perennials. So you can actually go through and create your own phenology and add those in if you want to, based on where you live or what happens to be around you. So first thing that's going to be out there is cabbage. Now this is only for pollen. It puts out a yellow flower with a yellow pollen, and this plant was going to grow where there's going to be water. It generates its own heat up to 70 degrees. So it will actually melt ice on water to come through. Early in the year, this is a very, very important source, because if it's warm at all for your bees to be able to fly, they're going to find this and you're going to see them coming home. They're going to look like they've got little yellow suit jackets on, because they come home just so yellow with this pollen. Again, next early season, and you saw that in the phenology calendar, is going to be the silver maple. It sometimes is a little cool for the bees to be flying, but if they're out there, this is going to be a very, very good plant for them to be able to get their first pollen, first honey, first nectar and pollen from. So the next plant is going to be, this is a tree again, this is going to be a red maple, same situation. It's going to be an early season plant for pollen and for nectar. Willow, these are male and female plants. The male plants are the only ones that put out pollen. They put out pollen and nectar. The male plants are going to have a little bit more fragrant flowers. They're going to be a little bit bigger, but the bees can come and get nectar from either males or females, only pollen again from the males. These grow primarily in ditches and any area that's going to be a little bit damp. There are going to be a lot of different wild willows, but if you find that you need something early in the year, you can go out and buy willows. If there's a weeping willow around, you've got a lot of pollen and nectar that's going to come from the weeping willow. Alder, now this is a tree that's wind pollinated, so there's not going to be any kind of flower. You have to remember that anything wind pollinated is not going to put out a big flower, because it doesn't need to attract any kind of an insect for pollination. The wind itself is what pollinates this. But the bees will come to the pollen in the little catkin-like features on this. It is kind of a brownish purple. I might mention most pollens are varying degrees of yellow, light yellow, dark yellow. Some of them are browns, and if I remember, I will mention the pollen color as I can. You can kind of watch the bees as they're bringing things in, so that you kind of know what's out there from the pollen coming in, even if it's not necessarily that you can see these particular trees. Now, purple dead nettle, this is actually a winter annual. And sometimes before the farmers are out there plowing their fields, you can look and you can see like a full field of purple. That's generally going to be this purple dead nettle. It's an excellent plant for pollen early. I used to pull this in my little patches of flowers before I saw so many honeybees in there. And I thought, I don't want to pull this. It sets seed and then it dies, so it really doesn't interfere with anything a little bit later. And it produces a red pollen. So if you see your bees coming in with red pollen early in the year, this is where they're finding it. So you know you've got a good stand somewhere. Now, dandelions, this is a phenology term that I like to use, because when you see dandelions out there, you know that your colonies are starting to expand. This is an excellent plant for brood rearing. It's a major pollen and nectar source. And those of you who are interested in native lady beetles, this plant actually provides about half of the pollen that they need before the aphids come in. So you can, afford to have these kind of little plants in your yard, even if you don't have one full of them. I have every weed person that wants to control weeds coming into my neighborhood, knocks at my door, wants to get rid of my weeds. And I say, no, I keep bees and I want to have those. All those weeds are very important for ours. Dandelion is particularly important. Mustards are the next one that's on the list. This is one of the few plants that contains all 9 amino acids that the bees need. They, like us, need all of the amino acids for their good health. Mustards are also something that will help them build up very, very quickly in the spring. It's a very, very good plant for them. I might mention that if you have cattle, this particular mustard can cause some digestive issues in those, so you might be aware of that. The other thing that you need to know about this is the honey that comes from mustards tends to granulate a little bit more quickly because it has a little bit more glucose in it as opposed to fructose in the sugars. So this will granulate, but usually at this point in time, there's not a lot of nectar left over for honey. So they're going to be using this primarily for their own buildup. Now, apples and crab apples, that's a different story. This is about the time when they start building up for storage for us to be able to have honey. They'll use a lot of this for themselves, but at this point, it's really important that you know what's going on in that hive, because when the bees are going to start to swarm, when the crab apples and apples come in, this is about the time they're really going to start swarming. So know what's going on if you want to keep the bees that you have in your colony. Titterian honeysuckle, this is something that starts really blooming after the willows stop, and it's an invasive, and I know they're cutting it down in a lot of places. Bees, they're not native insects either. Honeybees, I should say, are not native insects either. So they tend to like a lot of these things. So these are excellent for bees, but they're not necessarily so good for our environment. Tulip poplar, these are beautiful flowers. They're very high in the trees, so you're not likely to see them. It's also not as good year to year. Some years you have better, some years you have a little bit less. If you do have a good crop, you can actually have a red nectar, which I find very interesting. I have never seen it, but they say it's very good. It's not the greatest honey, but it's used primarily for baking. They say it makes an excellent baking honey. Now, black locust, you can see by this flower that this is in the legume family. Legumes are typically always very good for bees. This is a weedy tree. It's going to be growing in areas where it's dry. It's been disturbed. A lot of people cut them down, but if you have drawn comb in your hive and you have a good year for black locust, again, it's not good every year, but if you have a good year for it, they can fill up an entire honey super within a couple of days. So again, phenology, when you know this tree is coming out there, you better make sure that you have a honey super on, because they will fill it up very quickly. White clover. White clover is good for lots and lots of things. Number one, it is in the year through probably close to fall. It is a legume, so it's very, very good for them in that way. It puts in nitrogen in your soil, fixes nitrogen in the soil, so that's a good thing for your soil. It also stays low, so if you have a full clover yard, you don't hardly ever have to mow your grass. It's a very, very good honey, and again, it's a very long-lasting plant. So this is one of the best things that you can put into your yard. It's an easy thing to buy. It sometimes has to be inoculated if you don't have any clover already there, but it's an excellent plant. Catalpa. Now, those of you who are fishermen are going to recognize this tree because it is the sole host for the Catalpa sphinx moth. A lot of people who fish use those for baits. It's a very good bait, I understand. They also have nectaries not only in the flower, but on the outside of the flower. And I think that's probably the reason that it draws that moth. And it also, this is the one that in the fall, when it puts out the fruit, it has like those long cigar-like things. So it's pretty easy to identify. This is also another good plant. It'll grow kind of what the soil is a little bit damper, so it doesn't have to be really dry. There are a few plants, and I'll name a couple of those that actually will do pretty well in moister soils. Sweet clover. Now this is weed. This is a tall plant. It's probably maybe 3 feet tall. It's a biennial, which means that it puts out flowers at the bottom the first year. Second year, it puts out its flowers, and then it'll die, but it'll reseed. This is a legume. It's an excellent honey, probably one of the top honeys. If you happen to have a hive that's near these plants, you can easily put on 100 pounds of honey just with this one. So this is excellent. There's a white one and a yellow one. Basswood, this is supposed to be the best honey that there is. So if you have a big selection of basswood trees and you're interested in selling varietal honey, put your super on when you see the first bloom, take your super off shortly after the last bloom, and you can pretty much assure you're going to have a premium crop to be able to sell. Staghorn sumac, this is male and female plants, so it's important that you kind of keep an eye on those. They also want to sucker, so unless you have really a lot of room, you don't necessarily want to plant one of these, although these are pretty much in the wild, so they're pretty frequently available to the bees. Also, those little red pods in the fall, you'll see them out there, and you can cut those off and use those in your smokers. They make really good fuel for your smokers. Purple loosestrife, another invasive plant, but for beekeepers, this is an excellent plant. If you happen to have your bees anywhere near this, you will have a really, really good supply of nectar. Loosestrife blooms also for a very long period. It'll start like in mid-season. It'll go pretty much through the late summer. They say the flavor of the honey from this is like a butterscotch taste with a hint of fennel. I've never tried it, but they say it's really very, very good honey. Japanese knotweed, another invasive. So again, for beekeepers, it's great. For the environment, it's not so great. Male and female plants, excellent nectar source. They can call it bamboo honey sometimes. It sells for a premium price. It's darker like buckwheat, but it has a very light buckwheat taste. Some people like it, some people don't. Again, male and female plants. The male flowers pretty stand up, pretty straight. The females are a little bit droopier. This also is a good pollen producer. So late in the summer, you will see your bees bringing in white, it's like snow white pollen. So if you see snow white pollen coming in and it's late summer, you can pretty much bet, well, you've got to have this plant near enough by that they're going to be out there collecting. Goldenrod. Goldenrod is a pollinator magnet. Everything likes goldenrod. It's a very, very good plant in helping your bees go into the winter season. I happen to like goldenrod honey. It's my favorite. It's a nice warm body, or a full body, I should say, honey, and it's my favorite. They say if we have rain somewhere around 4th of July, that you'll have a good nectar crop for it. Also, you can tell when they're collecting goldenrod because it puts out a pretty crummy smell. Unless you're familiar with it, you might think there's something wrong with your hive. But once you become familiar with it and you smell that, you know that they're out there collecting goldenrod. And again, that's a very good plant and a very good nectar for them to be able to see through the winter. New England aster. This is going to be one of the last plants that is out there. They're collecting the pollen and the nectar from the very center, the yellow portion of the flower. The outside petals are actually, they're sterile plants and they're not going to have anything, or sterile petals, they don't have anything in them. But this is kind of a red, they'll bring in like a real deep orange to a reddish pollen, and that's again from the very center of that plant. And these grow pretty much wild. You'll see these grow everywhere. You can buy them, but it's probably not necessary unless you're really in the city where you're not going to have hardly any of these around. So now we can get into how we can help. After the basswoods are in bloom, there's really not a lot out there until the goldenrod comes along. So we can really make a big difference in being able to plant for the bees. The biggest thing that you have to do is make sure that you can provide season-long flowers. Each colony requires about 1 acre of blooms all season long. And you need some diversity of pollen again so that they've got the nutrition that they want. So it's important for you to make sure that you've got that for them. You want to try to plant at least 3 species spring, summer, and fall, because again, the diversity is very, very important. Plant swaths of a single species to increase the visibility and foraging efficiency. You know, bees, they do the waggle dance and they do the round dance to point the other bees as to where they want to go, but they also rely an awful lot on sight and taste. So if you've got a lot of plants together, it's easier for them to spot when they're going out there. Plus, it's easier for them because they don't have to forage from place to place. It's bees have, or honeybees have flower constancy, which means that they stay basically with the same type of flower for each foraging trip. It's not like they're going to go from a dandelion to a crabapple to a locust. They're going to go crabapple, 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 which makes them as effective pollinators as what they are. So this makes it much easier for them to be able to do that. Also, I might mention here that the colors that they like. They tend to like blues and violets, in yellows and whites. They say they don't see red unless there's some kind of an ultraviolet light there that actually guides them into the nectar source. It's very difficult for them to see reds. And you want to plant more than just cultivars and hybrids. Lots of times the developers that have made these plants, or hybridized, I should say, they've actually developed them to become maybe have more flowers or different colored flowers. And in the process, they actually end up in a situation where they don't produce any kind of pollen or nectar for the plant, for the bees. So it's important that you put in straight species as best as you can for honeybees again. And one thing you can do is just kind of pay attention as to what you see bees on. Go out there and take a look around. Go to your nursery, see where you see honeybees landing. One thing I might mention here is when you're going to nurseries, make sure that make sure that the plants have not been treated with neonicotinoids, a systemic insecticide that actually you can bring home and you can end up killing your bees with them. So I would caution you when you're buying the plants to make sure you take a look or ask the people whether or not they have been treated with systemic insecticides. Snowdrops, same thing. Snowdrops are orange, bring in an orange pollen. You will see that early in the year. And again, it's maybe not absolutely the best, but it's out there early in the year and important for them to have something. Hellebore, it will produce flowers in February. Tends to be evergreen all year. It's a very, very nice plant. It grows in shadier areas, like a little bit more alkaline soil maybe, but it's a good one early in the year. Cornelian cherry dogwood. One thing I didn't mention is that when you've got a smaller yard, trying to provide an acre of blooms for honeybees is very difficult. So trees are very, very important. Cornelian cherry dogwood actually blooms even before forsythia. So it's very early and the bees really, really enjoy being in there. They can produce a bloom that will stay blooming down to 18 degrees. So it's pretty hardy early in the year. And again, it's a very reliable source for them for both pollen and nectar. Crocus. Crocus is going to be pollen only. When you see a bee in a crocus plant, they actually look like they're having fun rolling around in there. They come home all coated in orange, kind of like if you put a chicken leg inside some kind of breading. They look like they're little breaded bees when they come home. But again, this is going to be a pollen source only, and it's early. Serviceberry, native tree, very good pollen nectar. Again, a tree so that provides lots of blooms. This got its name actually from when they used to do services for funerals years ago. They would say when the serviceberry tree was in bloom, the ground was typically warm enough to be able to dig a grave. So that's how this tree got its name. But again, it can be kind of an understory plant that doesn't really like necessarily full sun. The Canadian, the Amelanchier canadensis can actually survive wet feet. It'll survive in wet feet. So it can have a little bit of dampness, which is good for that one. Redbud. This is a plant, again, it's another legume, early season, and it's going to be something that your bees are definitely going to be working before there's a lot else out there. And I have these little eyeballs near the trash cans. Bees are very nosy. They will check out everything to see if there's any kind of pollen or nectar for them. Bush honeysuckle. This is a native honeysuckle. A little bit earlier, you will definitely see a lot in these. They does not spread like crazy like some of the other honeysuckles do. So it's kind of a, gets just a little bit bigger and bigger every year, but it's an excellent pollen and nectar source for them. ALSIKE clover. This plant has a little bit of pink where the white clover is mostly white. This will grow in an area that's a little bit damper. So if you have areas that maybe regular clover doesn't do so well in, this is good. But I will caution you with this in that if you have horses, this can actually cause them skin disease, and it can actually affect their liver. So if you have horses, you do not want this particular clover around. But other than that, it stays low. It fixes nitrogen in the soil just like the white clover does. It blooms for a long time, so it starts in late spring, maybe early summer, and it'll bloom pretty much through the whole season. So if you don't have horses, and you have a damper area where you'd like to put some clover, this one is another one that'll work well. Blackberries, also raspberries. These are biennials, which means that they put out a cane with just leaves on it the first year. The second year it produces a flower, reseeds, then it dies, and it will not come back then until the following year. Excellent source if you want a specialty honey. If you have enough of them around, again, you can sell this for a premium price. So I would encourage you to, do some of these. The wild ones are brambles, so, they're out and around and they're going to be collecting any of it. Anyway, it contributes to your normal honey supply to make it pretty tasty. Now, things that you really have to keep in mind are pesticides, because if you have bees, you really don't want to be contaminating anything with pesticides. If something would come up that maybe you have a show flower that you really have to spray something, you want to keep in mind the time of day. You certainly don't want to spray when the bees are out there foraging, so you want to try to do it in the evening. You certainly don't want to use any kind of a systemic, because that's a problem. Formulation, again, makes a big difference. You don't want to use a systemic. You don't want to use something that's got a dust. Bees are particularly made, I should say, or created for collecting pollen, which is a lot of dust. So that's bad. They also have a new kind of a pesticide. They're called these microencapsulated pesticides, where they're like little pellets where bees mistake them for pollen. They come and they collect it and they take it back to their hive and they feed the babies with this. So that is probably the worst. It's only been out for the last few years, so it's relatively new. But it's one of the worst things that you can do for your bees, or that you can use. Also, you have to be concerned about the inert ingredients. Sometimes the stuff isn't on the labels, but it can actually affect the bees adversely. And they're finding too the herbicides and fungicides. In the past, they didn't think that was a big problem, but they're finding now that even if it doesn't do damage on one application, over time, the mixture and things can give them sublethal doses. So it can really be a big problem for those. Even some of the other ones that they claim are okay for bees, they're finding out that over time, no, they're not okay for bees. Even birds are having problems with some of these things that have been treated with some of these pesticides. Neonicotinoids in particular, that's a big deal. And they should do very, very well. Just keep an eye on what's going on. The phenology chart is very, very good to help you with that. And it's important that you do for the diversity for the pollen in particular. If worse comes to worse, you end up feeding your bees. You get sugar water, you get them pollen patties, and sometimes you just have to do what you have to do. And also, I will make sure that you have a list of the plants that I have mentioned here, particularly the really, really good ones. And I thank you very much for your time and interest. I wish you much luck foraging with your bees. Thanks so much. Have a great day.